Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Myers-Emery, and I am the manager of digital engagement at the George Eastman Museum. And I am very excited today to be hosting this demonstration and talk on floral cyanotypes. So we have landscape manager Dan Bellavia, who's going to be sharing what is happening with Dutch Connection, a little bit of history, and share some of the flowers. Dutch Connection actually opens tomorrow officially, so we are very grateful to Dan for taking this time away from getting the floral display all set up. And then after that, historic process specialist Nick Brandreth is going to show us how you can use some of the flowers from Dutch Connection as well as other materials to create cyanotypes that are lovely but also simple to make. So thank you so much for joining us today as we embark on this amazing talk and demonstration. Dan, let's start things off.
Hello, everybody. As Kate said, I'm Dan Bellavia. I'm the landscape manager. It is my pleasure and duty to put on the Dutch Connection every year. This year will be our 27th annual show. It's been roaring and growing every year. It's a rather interesting show. If you haven't been here, I have filled the house with all sorts of different bulbs and spring flowers. This year I have close to 17,000 bulbs that we're hoping to have on display at one point throughout the show. The show is 3 weeks long, so you don't get to see all of them at once, but you do get to see pieces of it as you go through. Some of the history on it, it's rather interesting how this came about. Back in 1895, George Eastman took a bicycle ride or bicycle tour of Holland. And it was there that he was first exposed to tulips. In the late 1800s, tulips weren't really used in gardens around here. And he went and saw the fields there. And there's fields and fields and fields of tulips. And decided he would have some come home with him. He had written a letter to his mother to tell her all about it and decided to start bringing them in for his property. When he finally had the property here built in 1903, he began ordering them in 30 to 40,000 a year he would bring in to plant around the property and to grow in his greenhouse. And every winter he would force them so that he could have tulips and daffodils throughout the winter and be able to brighten up the house quite a bit. So back in 1995, the landscape department decided that it would be a good idea to bring that back. Bring that tradition back into the house. And they started with the first Dutch Connection in 1995. They started with 200 pots, some daffodils, some hyacinths, some tulips, and that was it. This year I have over 2,000 pots that'll be on display, and I have added an awful lot of different other flowers into it. We now have amaryllis, we have grape hyacinths, we have early lily irises. I bring in some of the very early spring annuals that come out. So we have begonias, we have primula, we have clivia, things like that that you would see in a garden in early spring. It's a great display that we have. We have changed how we used to do it. If you've been to the museum, we have a grand conservatory that's used for this. And that conservatory usually is filled wall to wall on the floor. That's how we would do our display. With COVID now, we've changed the way it is, and it's a nice little two-way path. You come in on one side. This year, you will see all the daffodil displayed on one side with amaryllis and those early yellow spring flowers that we have. Then you come around and walk underneath the grand elephant's head, and that's where you'll see the displays of the tulips, the calla lilies, all the different little things that we brought in. It's a rather nice walk through the museum. What I love about the whole show is you get to have the sights and the smells of springtime. You know, looking at the flowers and you see the windows behind it and you see the 12 inches of snow that are on the ground right now. And some of the days that it's bitter cold. This is something, at least this show shows you that winter's not here for good. That there is hope and we will finally see springtime. This year I have 25 different types of tulips that I'm hoping to have out. I have 12 different types of daffodils, 9 different types of hyacinths, 8 different types of amaryllis. So there's a lot of interesting colors and textures that you would see. This is obviously all done by myself, my staff, and my volunteers. My volunteers put in an awful lot of time to make sure that this show actually gets off the ground. They pot up the bulbs. They help us move the bulbs to the root cellar, to the greenhouse to help grow. They water the bulbs. They help me with the plant sales. And they put in some immense amount of hours to make sure that this show gets off the ground. And every year we've had some great success. We do run into problems. This year, one of the problems I ran into is we ordered a beautiful red amaryllis that we've had in the past, and something must have happened between us and the grower and the shipper, because what we ended up with was pink ones, a completely different variety. Now, as we order these kind of things and bring them in, obviously I'm looking at bulbs. I only have a small idea of what I ordered and that it should be that way. But every year we seem to end up with a surprise when the bulbs start blooming. All of a sudden there's something there that we didn't order. But it's a nice pleasant surprise. We've never had anything that's bad, because when you're dealing with the tulips, there's not much that can really go bad. We can make it a different color. I've had tulips that have come in labeled properly, and when they came up, there were actually 2 different types of tulips in a pot. Great surprises to see. Some of the different things that we've brought in the past couple of years are tulips that change color as they age. As they start to mature, they'll change in colors. One of my favorites is called Foxy Foxtrot. The tulip comes up solid yellow, looks absolutely gorgeous, and then as it matures, it starts to turn this beautiful orange all the way around the edges, and then the petals almost turn completely orange. So you get this peachy orange tulip. This is why I tell people, if you come once, come every week, once a week, and you will see a different show every day. That's one of the things that I love about this, is it's changing every day. Every day I walk in there, and I'm in there every day, and I'm looking at it every day, I'm seeing a change. Even throughout a single day, you can see amaryllis starting to open in the morning, and then by the afternoon, it's fully open, and nice to be able to see it. But the colors, the changes of the things, and that's what we've been experimenting with, is the different types of tulips that are out there that really change a lot between the time they come up and the time that they're ready to be, when they're spent at that point. Some people love to see those perfect tulips that stay those perfect shapes. We bring in a lot of double tulips, a lot of miniature tulips. We've started bringing in parrot tulips, which don't look really like typical tulips, that typical tulip shape. So as they grow older and they mature, they look completely different. They start putting their petals will start opening up a little more. They'll start having edges with frills, things like that. We've actually started bringing in ones that have smells. Not a real common one to have tulips that smell. We have found that the doubles, a lot of the double tulips come out, they have unbelievable odors. So when you walk into the room, you're not just smelling hyacinths. There are tulips out there. There are paper whites that are out there. So the house really fills up with the smell. One of the funny things is some of the people that work here actually have to keep their doors closed because they say the smell gets to be too much. For me, I love to go in there every day and just to smell it, and you close your eyes and think it's early spring and you're outside again. It's nice to be outside for a little bit. And I'd encourage everyone, if you're near or far, come see the show. This is one of the earliest forced bulb shows in North America. I have pushed it to the absolute limit as to how fast I can do this. The tulips come in June, or they get ordered in June, I'm sorry. They come in October, and we hit the ground running. We get them potted up. They go into a cold storage until the end of December. Then they start coming out into the greenhouse. And there's where a lot of our very difficult time starts going. If we don't have a cold enough winter, sometimes we have some tulips that will come up and we'll put lovely flowers out, and we'll have lovely leaves out, and we'll have no blooms whatsoever. The tulips need a very distinct cold period. But then we have to start bringing them into the greenhouse, and we have to make it so that everything's going to be blooming at the right time, at the same time, for a show that lasts for 3 weeks. So it takes a lot of juggling to make sure that it's going to happen. We bring it in stages. The tulips take the longest to put up a flower, so they're coming in the earliest, all the way up to the tay-to-tays, the very small miniature daffodils. that only take 2 weeks to bloom. So the trick is to get it all to come in and to be ready for everyone when they walk in the door to have a full display. Typically, we bring them in so that they're just a little before they're going to be fully bloomed. We put this show together for the last 3 days. We've been working on getting it all laid out. And there's tulips that haven't quite opened up yet because I know that by the time Saturday rolls around, they're going to just be coming up and start to show flower. And those will last up until probably the end of next week when we will come through and replace most all the flowers again. That's the other thing people don't realize is when they come in, they're always seeing fresh flowers that are out there. That's because every morning we're out there looking, deadheading any flowers that don't look good, replacing whole pots. So we're continually adding to the show, taking away from the show. We have some varieties that we know will show up for that third week of the show, but you won't see it for the first or second week. Or we have some that decided to be slow for a year, and all of a sudden, the ones I had planned for week 1 and week 2 all show up at the end. So on week 3, we've got all of this one kind of tulip that's in there that nobody else saw but that last week. So that's one of the reasons I always encourage people. Come once, you're going to see a fabulous show. Come every couple of days, you're going to see a different show every time because we're moving it, we're changing it. We're switching things around. We've got new things that are blooming at all times in the greenhouse. So it's a constant move and a constant change to the show. I happen to love doing this and love to be able to talk to the people that come in and see it because it really does bring a lot of joy to people. It takes a lot out of me. It takes a lot out of my assistant. We do some serious work through this time of year, and we work all the way through the year out in the gardens. And then when this comes in the winter, this takes us an extreme amount of our time, but it's worth it to see the joy that people have on their face when they come in. I've had people come, I've done this for the last 17 years, and I am amazed at how many more people are coming in and how many more people are hearing about it word of mouth about the Dutch connection, because it's a chance to come in and see all these flowers and at least get away from the thoughts of winter for a couple of hours and enjoy those smells. So, if you get a chance, I recommend everybody should come in. And as I had said earlier, that this wouldn't happen without my volunteers. These people are mostly retired people that come in and they do everything. They come and do pulling the weeds and things during the summer. And then they come in and this is probably the most exciting thing they get to do is to work the Dutch connection to be able to see things. So I encourage anybody who comes to see, come talk to us about volunteering. If you've got time to come help, my volunteers get to take all of these bulbs home with them when we're done. I don't like to compost them, so they get to take them home. They've been bloomed, but they can put them in their yard and they can bloom again next year. So I've got people that have done this show longer than I have that have absolutely spectacular shows in their gardens every year because they've been getting different bulbs every year. They just keep adding and adding. We do keep a few to put around the property. But when you order 16,000 bulbs in a year and you have a staff of 2, it's very difficult to plant all of those at one year. So we keep adding into certain corners, and then the next year we'll continue to put it around the property. Excuse me. Sorry. If you get a chance to come, we are always available. Both of myself and my assistant are in the show or around the show at all times. So we answer questions. We try to be able to give people as much information as they can. I'm more than happy to educate people about the bulbs and about the show and about plants. So I love to be able to talk to the people. And I also encourage them during the show. We have plants for sale. We sell just about everything that we have in the show. We sell to people who want to take some home. I tell people, take a little bit of Dutch connection home with you. You can brighten up your house. You can have a beautiful pot of daffodils that'll bloom in a couple of days once you bring it home and brighten up your own home. I've had people come to me and tell me that they've started making their own Dutch connection because I can show you how to force your own bulbs very simply and how to be able to pull those pots in and let them start growing and have your own Dutch connection. So I encourage everyone, please come by at least once. Come see the show. Stop by and say hi to us at the sales table. Ask the questions you have, but come and enjoy the show and the colors that we have and the flowers that we have and the smells that we have. Because there truly is a once a year chance to be able to see something like this. So, all right, Kate. I pretty much gave you a pretty good view of what goes on for the show. There's so much more I could talk about. I'd encourage people that if you get a chance to, I do have a talk coming tomorrow at 1 o'clock where I'm going to go through a complete behind the scenes. You get to learn exactly what goes involved with this. So I hope that sort of gives you an idea of what's going on and ties into what Nick's going to show you about doing the flowers. The flowers he's using this year are actually ones that I pulled out of the show. So enjoy the rest of the show today.
Thanks so much, Dan. And just to share with everyone, the show will be up through March 6th, so opening tomorrow, and then it will be going through March 6th. It is included with regular museum admission, so there's no extra cost or tickets. Non-members will need to buy tickets in advance, but you can get those online and learn more by either going to eastman.org/Dutch Connection or eastman.org/visit. So let's learn a little bit more about what we can do with these flowers. Nick?
So hi, everybody. We're going to start out with a quick PowerPoint, and we're going to cover cyanotypes because this demonstration is inspired by the Dutch Connection. There's a wonderful history of making botanical sample prints using the cyanotype process, and it's a really fun process to use, and it's very, very easy. It's simple. You don't need a lot of stuff. You don't need complicated equipment, and it's something that everyone can do at home. And I'm going to show you today how you can make your own cyanotype from scratch. But we're going to start out with a little bit of information before we get going. So we got a quick PowerPoint for everybody here, and let's fire this up. So the cyanotype. The cyanotype was introduced by Sir John Herschel in 1842. Sir John Herschel, in my opinion, is the grandfather of photography. Everybody likes to talk about Talbot and Daguerre, but it's without Herschel, we don't actually get to keep photographs. Daguerre and Talbot, they understood how to make the photos react and reduce, and you get a picture on paper or some other type of material, but the struggle was keeping the photograph. But that's a whole different story. Herschel was a polymath. He was a mathematician. He was a scientist. He was an astronomer. He was an inventor and an early pioneer of photographic process. Not one person invents it, but he contributed a lot to the history of photography. And one of the most important things is his studies of the sensitivity of iron compounds. Now, iron by itself is not necessarily sensitive to light. But if we combine several iron compounds together, we can make something sensitive to light. So let's review how we do that. We need to mix a solution of two different chemicals. On the left, we have ferric ammonium citrate, and on the right, we have potassium ferrocyanide. Now that's a very important part right there. If I take away that ferra part, I just have potassium cyanide, which is a horrible poison, and we don't want to use that. But if I attach a little bit of iron into the chemical structure there, I have a relatively inert, that's not inert, but a relatively harmless chemical that's typically used as a bleach during silver gelatin printing and other silver gelatin based processes. But if we combine the potassium ferrocyanide with the ferric ammonium citrate, we create a working solution to make our cyanotype. So we have to take both of those, put them into water, and then we combine that together and we make our working solution. What we do, in this case, I'm going to brush this on paper, but you're not limited to paper by any means. But paper is a great place to start because it's easily available, and it's a good way to troubleshoot and get used to the process. So what we do is we combine our two chemicals together. We make our working solution, and we can use any number of ways to get this onto the paper. Today, I'm going to demonstrate by just using some rolled cotton, and that's what I did here. I gently spread the working solution onto the paper into a rough square. You could make circles, triangles, that becomes the artistic part, but we get the solution onto our support base. Then we take a negative, or in this case, botanical samples, and we place them in contact with our paper. Now, one thing I want to point out here, notice how I have the sensitized paper out under regular light in this picture. Nothing's happening to it. That's because we have to expose it to ultraviolet light. Now, when exposed to ultraviolet light, there's a chemical change. It changes its chemical state. And what happens is we go from ferric to ferrose. So the exposure to light changes the chemical state, and the ferric salts change to a ferrous state. So the ferrocyanide becomes ferrocyanide. That's important. Okay, and what we're left with is when we remove the samples, we have a printed out image. The cyanotype falls into the category of printed out processes. Now, after it comes out of the printing frame, it's a stable print here that's formed ferrocyanide, okay? That iron compound, it changes from iron 3 to iron 2, and now we can have this permanent print on our paper. You notice here how it's still kind of yellow, right? That is it's still soluble. That stuff will wash away. Where it's reduced down now, that is insoluble. It's not going anywhere. Notice here how you can start to see some leaf detail. And down here, there's lots of it. And how this is sort of turned blue again. And while this is still that sort of yellowish color. Now, when I place the print into regular tap water, okay, it removes the unexposed iron salts and it starts another state change. And notice here, I have 3 stages. This I've completely soaked on the top, and notice how the printout underneath the leaf is starting to turn white and clear. Here, I've dipped it just very quickly, and you can still see some of the soluble salts, iron salts that are unexposed still in the print down here as well. And on the bottom of the piece of paper here, we can still see where it is completely dry and it's just that reduced down iron material. Eventually, when I completely wash my print, how do I say this? It converts to another state and we form ferrocyanide, or more commonly known as Prussian blue. Prussian blue, if you've ever used watercolors or you've clothing, textiles, and things like that, it's a very common material in other things. And essentially what we're doing when we create a cyanotype is we make a chemical reaction. In this case, we're using paper within the paper fibers to create Prussian blue. Prussian blue is extremely stable. It's not going anywhere. The cyanotype is one of the most archival processes because that Prussian blue, it doesn't want to deteriorate. So as long as you process this with care and you make sure you wash it and store it correctly, these cyanotypes will last way longer than we will. Now, the main use for the cyanotype, especially with Herschel's invention, Herschel wasn't necessarily thinking about art or even making or practicing photography. Because remember, in 1842, photography is like 2 years old, 3 years old at this point. So it's in its infancy, and they don't have the concept of practicing photography like we do today. But a blueprint provided rapid reproduction of drawings for engineers and mechanics and architects and things like that. And it required very little. You take your paper, you could slap your drawing on top of it. That would have been done with ink that's blocking that UV light from hitting the paper. And right on the job site, you could stick this out in the sun, throw it in some water, and you can have as many copies of your print that you're drawing here for your building as you want. This particular blueprint here is a blueprint of Mr. Eastman's house. And one of the great parts about this, I'm going to jump to this next slide, is this was wonderfully conserved by our fantastic conservator, Sarah Casto. And if you'd like to see more about her in-depth conservation of this blueprint, you can hop on our YouTube channel and you can find the link to that video and see all the very tiny parts and pieces and how Sarah goes in and takes care of this. But remember, blueprints it's a rapid mechanical way to reproduce these drawings, and you have infinite copies. It doesn't cost a lot of money. And eventually they weren't even brushing their own chemistry. There was commercially available paper to make this still work. And this lasted well into, almost modern times, until digital printing made it more affordable to copy these things. But I'm sure you might find people who still make blueprints like this. Now, the true champion of the process, in my opinion, is Anna Atkins. And Anna Atkins was, again, an Englishwoman, friends with Sir John Herschel. And Anna Atkins actually publishes the first photo book ever in the entire world. And some people, Talbot gets a lot of credit for that with the Pencil of Nature, but that doesn't come out till I believe 44, and Anna Atkins publishes in 43. So she is the first photo book ever. And what Anna Atkins did, and again, I apologize if I'm getting my history wrong, but Anna Atkins, she publishes this first photo book, and they're botanical samples of seaweed and other things, materials that you'd find in the ocean. And they're beautiful. They're wonderful if you get a chance to look at them. But this is inspiration for a lot of people to create their own artwork and different things. So Anna Atkins, a couple other things here. The main part of this, though, the cyanotype, it has it's very, very popular with amateur photographers. And I'm not saying amateur in the sense that they don't know what they're doing, but amateur in the sense that they might not be professionals and they're doing it for fun. And why? Because it's cheap. You don't need a lot of stuff. You only need water to process this. You need 2 chemicals, some water, and a bit of paper, and you can make prints. You can make reproductions and other things very easily. Photographers may have used them to proof their negatives to show the client ahead of time, like, hey, check this out. But they'd want the black and white image, black and white. Not everybody, I wouldn't want a blue image of myself, but some people do like them. But you're not limited to keeping it blue. You can actually go in after the fact and you can tone your prints with other things. And here's a few samples just to show you of the versatility of the process. This is a pear leaf from my garden. And these require a lot of printing time. Again, during the summertime, all right, you're going to have more light energy, so they'll print faster. In the fall and the wintertime, it's a little bit harder to print and get such wonderful detail, but you just give it more time and let it keep on printing. Here is a pawpaw leaf from my garden. And as Dan mentioned, sometimes they let staff here take home the extra bulbs from the Dutch Connection. So I've been here for about 10 years now, and my garden is full of all sorts of extra bulbs. So I'm really excited to see my personal Dutch Connection at home in the next few weeks as spring starts to pop up here. And other little samples and things you might notice here. It's really good to collect your flowers, collect your samples as you go and press them, get them dry. You can use fresh samples, but sometimes it's a little difficult because remember, a flower is a 3-dimensional object and we're going to smush this in contact with our paper. So sometimes it's going to squish and it might press out some water from inside of the plant itself, which could, remember, because the cyanotype chemistry is water soluble, it can displace the chemistry a little bit, but you get these fascinating results that are really, really fun. And you don't have to use botanical samples. If you have photographic negatives and you'd like to make a photographic print, absolutely. Again, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's fun. If you've never made a cyanotype, I really encourage you to try it. And if you say, well, Nick, I don't know how to make a cyanotype. Well, guess what? You're about to learn. So let's go. So I'm going to close this down and we're going to go ahead over here real quick. And I just need to switch my cameras. So give me 1 second. We're going to come here and we have a much nicer camera view for you over here. So you want to make a cyanotype, but you don't know how. Let me show you. Here's the things you need. First, we always need gloves. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop on some gloves because we're going to touch chemicals. Whenever you touch chemicals, you should have gloves on. I should probably put my glasses on too. Let me grab those. Safety first, because we want to make sure that we can continue to do photography and we need to keep our eyes and our bodies safe while we do this. So first, we're going to take a large beaker and we're going to have 2 other beakers. Now, if you don't have beakers, that's okay. You just need something glass that you can put some water and chemistry in. Now, we're going to take, this is a 250 milliliter graduated cylinder, and I'm going to take some distilled water. Now, this is going to be for our working solution. This is going to be for our 2 chemicals. First chemical, potassium ferrocyanide, 8 grams. Second chemical, ferric ammonium citrate, 20 grams. Okay, I'm going to measure out 100 milliliters of distilled water. You could probably use tap water, but I would avoid it. Whenever you're mixing chemistry, use distilled water. It just eliminates a variable and it keeps things easier, right? Because we don't know what is hanging out in our tap water. And remember, it's always more accurate to measure volume in a graduated cylinder than it is in a beaker. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to check the bottom of my meniscus. I just need a little bit more. The bottom of my meniscus is at 100 milliliters, so I am good to go. I'm going to fill this up. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that for the next beaker. A little too much that time. Let's put it back. All right, let's check the meniscus again. Once it stops wobbling, 100 milliliters. So let's set that aside. And there you go. I seem to not have brought my stirring rod in, so I'm going to grab that. And I have my stirring rod here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to place my 8 grams of potassium ferrocyanide into my 100 milliliters of distilled water. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to mix that up. Mix it, mix it, mix it. Now, if you combine potassium ferrocyanide with some hypo, okay, and you put that in some water, you can use that as a reducing agent. So if you're doing silver gelatin prints and you've overdeveloped your print a little bit, so it's kind of muddy, you could stick that in some potassium ferrocyanide and hypo, and that creates Farmer's Reducer. Well, we're not going to make Farmer's Reducer today. We're going to make a cyanotype working solution. So we have to go ahead and mix our part B. 20 grams of ferric ammonium citrate into 100 milliliters of distilled water. And that stuff just, boom, it just goes right away. It's actually really cool to watch how quickly that ferric ammonium citrate dissolves and goes into suspension in the water. All right. And once that's completely mixed, and I can see here that all of my potassium ferrocyanide crystals have dissolved, I'm going to go ahead and just combine them into my bigger beaker here. And there you go. That is how we create a cyanotype working solution. And I'm going to go ahead and just give this a little spin here just to make sure. Okay. Grab one other thing. So what you need now is you need a little dish or something to place your solution in, because it's going to be hard to get your fingers in there and get all that solution out. So I just have a little Pyrex dish here. And I'm going to pour just enough in there. And when you look at this, if I look at this with some transmitted light, it's a olive green color. And that's the way it's supposed to look. It's good to go. Now, what do we need to make the cyanotype after we've mixed our chemistry? That's all we need to do for the chemistry. That's it. 2 chemicals, some distilled water, ready to go. The other things that we need now, I'm going to use some cotton. So I have some rolled cotton here. We need a support base. So you have to decide what you would like to make your cyanotype on. In this case, we're just going to use some Bristol paper. This is Fabriano Bristol. Okay, it's an artist paper. This is very easy to find. You can find it at your local art store. If you don't have a local art store, hop online and go to, say, Dick Blick or something like that. And this is a very easy to find paper. It's very good for alternative processes. It's good for salt printing, cyanotypes, any number of processes. Great paper here. So what I've done is I've trimmed my piece of paper down to 8 by 10, so it will fit inside of my printing frame. If you don't have a printing frame, don't fret. I'll show you a trick in a little bit. Now, to make coding easier, I'm going to use a Lazy Susan. So you could go to Target or, the Goodwill, Savers, and I guarantee you're going to be able to find one of these very cheap. I have a piece of plywood, okay? And on top of it, I've taped down a piece of plexiglass. Why'd you do that, Nick? Well, because plexiglass, it's not gonna soak up the material, the cyanotype solution. It's not gonna stain the wood and get trapped and potentially contaminate other pieces of paper that I want to use later. When I'm done, if there is some material that has spilled onto my plexiglass, I can just simply wipe it away with some water and I start with a fresh surface. So I'm going to take my paper and I'm going to tape this down to my plexiglass. Okay. And now here comes the creative part. This is up to you. How do you want to coat your paper? You could float this and you could coat the entire piece of paper. You could brush this on with a sponge. You could brush this on with your fingers. You can dab it, pour it, whatever you want. Have fun with this. Do not feel limited in your creativity. Okay, a lot of times photographers and artists put themselves into compartments and you say, I have to do it this way or I have to do it that way. Don't get caught up in that. Have fun with it. My favorite way to do it is actually to tape a little border around here so I have a nice clean edge, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to kind of do a sloppy, fun edge on this piece of paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rolled cotton, right, and I'm just going to kind of pull this in so I have almost like a dumpling or a pounce for makeup. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this here and I'm just going to gently dip that into my cyanotype solution. And I'm going to go here and I'm just going to gently brush this with overlapping strokes across my paper, bit by bit by bit. All right, overlap, 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 overlap. There you go. Now I'm going to take this and just throw this out because I don't need it. But what we're doing now is we just want to let it soak into the paper fibers a little bit. Remember that you have to think of the paper like carpet, right? Shaggy carpet. And think of our chemistry like grape juice. Imagine if you spilled grape juice on a nice shaggy carpet. Those carpet fibers are just going to soak up all of that juice. The longer we let it soak up, the deeper it's going to get into the paper. So we're just going to let this sit here for a minute, soak it up. So we have a nice even coating. Now, I want to print with this right now. So you have a choice. You could brush this and just let it sit and it will dry naturally on its own, or we can speed it up. And because time is of the essence today, let's speed this up. It would help if I turn on the hair dryer. A little puddle here. Let's make sure that's really nice and dry. Make sure we dry it on the back. And now we're good to go. So what we can do is you have options here. Like I said, you can use a photographic negative if you want. A lot of times it's really simple. Again, in the wintertime, I don't have lots of fresh flowers or other materials and things like that. So it's good to go out and collect botanical samples and you can press them, let them dry, and then they're beautiful, wonderful things to use. But Nick, I don't really want to use botanical samples. That's cool. You could draw on glass, right? And place that in contact. You could use lace or other types of materials, okay? Some of the original things, because remember when Herschel was doing this, they didn't have photographic negatives the way we do today. So a lot of times it would have been line art or other things like that. Just have fun with it. So what we're gonna do is to be inspired by the Dutch connection here, I'm gonna take this razor blade and I'm just gonna nip one of these leaves off of this plant here. Okay. And I don't want to use one of the flowers. Flowers will work. And you saw some of my samples there. But remember, a flower is a three-dimensional object. I'm going to go ahead and smush this into my printing frame. So sometimes it doesn't want to go in the printing frame and it'll get mushed down, but other times that result is very fun. But it is easier to use leaves and things like that. And fresh leaves will help give you lots of veins and other details in your print. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our printing frame. If you've never seen a printing frame before, it's pretty straightforward. So you have a piece of glass on the front and you have this hinged back here, piece of glass on the inside, and this hinged back that moves. The reason the hinge moves is because typically I would be printing a portrait in this frame. So when I put the thinner side down, that's typically waist, stomach area on most people. So I put that there. And when I want to check my print, I can pull this back and inspect the face in the larger area. So we don't have to worry about that today. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to gently place my botanical sample in the center here. And I'm going to put this in contact with my piece of paper. Now, sometimes the botanical samples, they move around. So I can feel where it is here. So I'm just going to press that with my thumb. All right. And that's holding that in place. And I'm going to get the bottom piece here, and I'm going to get that in first, right? And I can hear the leaf. Remember, it's 3D, so it's crunching a little bit as I put it in there. It's okay. Have fun with it. Now I'm going to show you because exactly what I said just happened. If we zoom in on this and change our focus here, see how the leaf stem spurts some water out of there, and it's actually dissolving some of that soluble cyanotype material. That's going to happen, but remember, have fun with it. Now, if you live in upstate New York like I do, you don't necessarily always have access to fantastic sunlight. So what we need are UV lights. So we can use an artificial light source to print with these. So let's go ahead and stick this under there. And here's some samples that I've had printing for the past few hours. So we're going to put this here and we're just going to slide this aside real quick. All right. And I'm going to show you what happens when we process these. I just have to grab the water out of the sink in the other room, so hang tight. So to process these, all we need is just some plain old tap water. So what we want to do, and typically, again, because this is a demonstration, I'm limited on time and I'm limited on space. I would be doing this in my darkroom with running water, so I'm constantly changing out the water here. If you don't have access to a darkroom, that's totally fine. You can do this in your bathroom. Do this in your tub. As you can see here, I'm doing these right out here in this other room. So what we want to do is let's pop this out of here. As I mentioned, you don't have to limit yourself to just doing cyanotypes on paper. This is fabric cloth. So let's just drop that in the water, right? We're just going to rock that and agitate it. And here, let's reveal this a little closer to the camera. So the fun of the printing frame is, right, if I open this up, I can peel this back. And you see my wonderful cyanotype print that's ready to go. And if you look closely, notice all the detail, okay? I've had this printing for better part of maybe 2 hours now down here in the basement. And that's going to be a requirement if you want to try to get all of this nice detail like you would if you were able to print in the sun. The sun is the ultimate light source, so it's going to print way faster and way easier than if we're trying to use artificial light. Now, to show you something fun, I'm going to go ahead and I'm only going to dip the bottom part of this paper in here first. Okay. And you can see it right here. Let's come a little closer. See it now as the water washes away the soluble iron compounds. Notice how it's getting darker because now that area is being exposed to the oxygen in the room and it's turning into Prussian blue. So let's go ahead now and stick that all the way into the water and we'll see what happens. Okay, now those areas where I had all that detail in my leaf, they kind of went away because I didn't print it deep enough, which is something that happens sometimes when you're printing with these artificial light sources. So if you want that good detail like that, it's a really good idea to go ahead and use the sun if you have the option. Now notice how it's pretty blue right now, right? And it's going to continue to get blue as more oxygen gets to it as I continue to wash this. But remember, this is an oxidation reaction, so we can speed that up. And what we're going to do is that we're just going to add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. We're going to add a little extra oxygen into our wash water here, and let's see what happens. So remember how blue that was just a second ago? Not super blue. Look at it now. Whoa, let's bring that close. Look at that intense blue color, beautiful. All right, wonderful color right there. Now, sometimes, again, if you print this very deep, you'll get lots of information from your leaves. Other times like this, I didn't print it deep enough, so, I didn't get a lot of detail. But something that's very fun to do is if you make a cyanotype print and you have a very high contrast image where you don't have a lot of leaf detail and things like that, my wife and I actually like to go in and we'll hand color these with some watercolors and add our own color and our own texture into the print. So as you can see, there's lots of different ways that you can do this. You can go ahead and you can make cyanotypes on t-shirts and pillowcases and all sorts of other materials just like that. And all you need is three things: potassium ferrocyanide, ferric ammonium citrate, water, and then some paper or some sort of support. But that's how you make a cyanotype in less than 20 minutes. So anybody have any questions? Feel free to fire away.
Everyone, we'd love to get your questions. Feel free to use the Q&A function. I think there were a couple that popped up in the chat. Nick, how long do you expose them?
Again, that really it's determined by your light source. As you can see with the printing units over there, these are 50-watt DJ lights that you could get on Amazon. I believe they're YQL is the brand, made in China somewhere. But these are 50-watt LED lights that are for DJing and parties. And what I do is I gang them up. So you can put 2, 3, 4 of them together, and you can use several of those to do bigger prints or smaller prints. One of these is fantastic for an 8x10. But again, if you want really good, really strong leaf detail and information, it's a good idea. Well, I'll come over here. It's a good idea like this one. You can see how much information I got there. I printed this outside in the sun somewhere in, I want to say this was maybe end of September, beginning of October. And these printed for about an hour and a half in full sun to get all that information. And again, sometimes what you'll end up with is maybe something like this, where this also printed for 2 hours and I didn't get anything. That's because this was a dry leaf, and the dry leaf was very yellow in color. Yellow is going to block some of that UV light from hitting the surface. So it acts like a safe light or a filter. So be conscious of the materials that you're using and the light source that you're using. And again, the sun is going to print faster than ultraviolet light. But again, to get a nice, decent print, somewhere in the range of half an hour to an hour sometimes, depending on it. And again, I like these really, really deep blue prints. You don't have to print as deeply as I do, but I really prefer this color. So that's my personal preference, but don't let that affect you. Do what makes you feel good.
How do you suspend or stick the cyanotype onto glass?
Well, that's a trick that we'll have to reveal at another point in time, because we're hoping to have a cyanotype long form workshop this summer. I will tell you it's similar to other photographic processes where you use, something that's kind of like glue, but it's not necessarily glue. That's all I'll tell you there.
Yeah, we have had some other questions about supply lists and more details, and we are going to be doing that cyanotype workshop. So if you're ready to like make this, let us know. And if we get enough people, we'll pull together a more formal workshop so that we can share all of this.
And if you're interested, to build off what Kate said, please let us know, because what you're interested in is what we want to offer. So let us know. Tell us what you want to learn. Tell us what you want to see. And we can put together fantastic workshops for everyone.
So Nick, could this process be done using gelatin dry plate negatives?
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite ways to print with, is because my primary method for in-camera negative making is the gelatin dry plate. And you could, yeah, absolutely. You can use dry plates, wet collodion negative, 35mm negative. So you can use modern film. You can make your own film. Like I said, any way that you can block some light from hitting that, you could be making images with it. But yes, gelatin dry plates, wet collodion. Yep.
Is this safe enough to do with kids if they're
Totally.
wearing gloves and
100%.
goggles?
Two things that I forgot to show everybody that I want to make sure I show everybody. Yes, this is safe to do with kids. Just remember, treat every chemical like it, just treat it with respect and you're going to be okay. Remember, table salt and water are deadly if you don't use them correctly. Now, if you want to make your own cyanotypes, but you don't want to mess with the chemistry, there is commercially available cyanotype paper that you can find. Hop on a website like Freestyle, B&H, any number of online retailers will offer pre-made cyanotype paper. Just like the architects and engineers making blueprints, they use commercially manufactured paper. They didn't necessarily have to do that themselves. This is a great way to start. If you're not comfortable with the chemistry, start with some pre-made paper. When you see how simple and safe it is, then go ahead and order some of that chemistry. I will tell you, the raw chemicals are very cheap. If you call up Mike at Arcraft Chemicals in Almont, New York, he will set you up, and it's great. It's really easy to do, and you saw how safe it is. But again, just make sure you wear your gloves and wear some glasses. The other thing to keep in mind is, remember, that is bound up in water. So if I get some of this and it drips on the floor, it's not going to look like much. And then 2-3 days later, all of a sudden, you're going to see this dark blue spot form on your floor. So you can make a mess with this. So be careful and try to stay clean, but have fun with it. One of the coolest things people do is they make a big bucket of it. You make a big bucket of chemistry, soak a bed sheet or a pillowcase in the material, then go and lay it out in the sun, and you can lay on top of it, and you can make a photograph of yourself. Endless possibilities and creativity with the cyanotype process because it's safe and it's cheap.
So, and I'll just share too, I shared a link in the chat that is a video on how to do this using the Sunprint paper with kids. So one of our staff members, Emily Phoenix, went through this whole process showing with her daughter. So they collected floral specimens and then made them. So you can see what this process looks like if you want to do it with family, and we do have some instructions on that. Also, getting back to another family activity that we forgot to mention with Dutch Connection, we do have our Just for Kids bulb kits. We used to do the activity on site, but because of COVID, we are not doing it. But museum visitors are welcome and encouraged to get one of these Just for Kids bulb kits if you want to bring them home. My toddler did one last year and thought it was the best thing ever. And it was a great science activity to talk through every morning and watch the flower grow. And it's fun to have a little piece of it home with you. If you're not a child and you would like to bring some Dutch Connection home with you, we also have our bulb sale going on. So you can buy some of the plants like the one that Nick has, and you could actually replicate this whole thing and make your own cyanotypes at home using flowers from the Dutch Connection. Thank you so much. There were so many amazing questions. We will be sending out an e-newsletter with a link to this recording and our email. So if you want to follow up and ask Nick or Dan any questions about what's happening, that's a great way to keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for coming today. Nick, do you have one last thing you want to
one thing to throw in there, because I saw one question and it's something I wanted to get to. What happens if you don't have a fancy printing frame like I do? Well, it's easy. Go and get some glass or plexiglass, and then go to Staples or the dollar store and get some alligator clips like this. Place your piece of paper and your sample in contact with one another, and then take your alligator clips. You can use clamps from the hardware store, anything you want like that, and just go ahead and clamp this bad boy up and stick that out in the sun, and you have a DIY printing frame. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm here to help. Please email me, ask questions, and thank you for joining us in the Eastman Museum Dark Room.
Thank you so much. And we hope that we will see you this weekend or in the future soon for Dutch Connection opening tomorrow. Thank you all.